The February blizzard of 1865 carved through Wyoming territory with savage intent, transforming the once peaceful valley into an endless expanse of white desolation. Wind howled across the plains, driving ice particles that cut exposed skin like tiny razors and reducing visibility to mere feet. Nature, in her cruelest form, had claimed dominion over the land. Cheyenne, a broad-shouldered Cheyenne warrior of 32 winters, fought against the gale as he trudged forward. Beneath his weathered exterior lay a spirit hardened by loss, 7 years since U.S. cavalry raiders had destroyed his village, taking his wife and young son in flames, while he, wounded and powerless, could only watch. The jagged scar that ran from his right palm to wrist served as a permanent reminder of that day, when his knife had slipped as he fought desperately to reach them. He paused, squinting through the blinding curtain of white. Something about the massive snowdrift ahead struck him as unnatural, too sudden and steep to have formed by wind alone. An avalanche had recently cascaded down the mountainside. As he approached, the wind briefly subsided, allowing an unnatural sound to reach his ears, a faint whimpering that could easily have been mistaken for the wind's moan. Cheyenne dropped to his knees beside the drift years of hunting instincts, telling him something lay buried within. With bare hands, he began digging furiously through the packed snow, ignoring the biting cold that numbed his fingers. Minutes passed like hours until his hands struck fabric. What he uncovered made even his battle-hardened heart falter, a small girl no more than 8 winters old. Her face, streaked with frozen tears, was pale as moonlight. Her tiny hands, blue and raw, were frozen to the snow she had been frantically clawing at. Most striking were her eyes, wide, terrified, and focused not on her rescuer, but on a spot deeper in the drift. "Mother," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the returning wind. "She pushed me away when the snow came." The girl's fingers remained locked in position, still trying to dig, despite the cold that threatened her life. Following her gaze, Cheyenne understood immediately: an avalanche. And this child had survived only because her mother had shoved her clear of death's path, sacrificing herself in that final moment of love. "Help her," the child pleaded as consciousness began to fade. "Please, help my mother." Cheyenne scanned the horizon with practiced eyes. Fort Laramie lay 40 miles east, but the storm had sealed all passages. The temperature would plummet further after nightfall, giving the child perhaps 2 hours before the cold claimed her permanently. With gentle yet urgent movements, he used his breath to thaw her hands free from the ice. The separation produced a soft cry, the first indication she had truly registered his presence. "Be still, little one," he said in English, his accent deep but words clear. "I must see if you are badly hurt." Her eyes focused on him, momentarily widening at the sight of his copper skin and the single eagle feather tied into his long black braid. A flicker of fear crossed her features, quickly replaced by the dull acceptance of one too exhausted to resist. Her fingertips showed the telltale white patches of frostbite, and bruises were forming where the avalanche had struck her. But nothing appeared broken. More dangerous was her soaked clothing, stealing precious warmth from her small body with every passing minute. "What is your name?" he asked, already unwrapping his thick buffalo robe. The girl's teeth chattered violently. Miriam." She managed her gaze, drifting back to the snowdrift. "My mother." "Please." As Cheyenne wrapped the buffalo robe around her shivering form, he noticed something clutched in her right hand, a small wooden locket, its surface cracked but intact. What caught his eye was not the locket itself, but the subtle marking carved into its edge, a tiny symbol resembling a morning star, a design he had seen before, often used by his people. The girl's fingers maintained their death grip on the object, as though it anchored her to a world rapidly slipping away. "I will look for your mother," he promised, knowing what he would likely find. "But first you must be warm." In the distance, 2 mounted figures materialized through the swirling snow, thunder bear and running elk warriors from Cheyenne's hunting party. They circled cautiously at a distance, surveying the surroundings for threats while giving Cheyenne space to work. Raising his arm in a signal, they would recognize Cheyenne return to the Snowdrift. Drawing his war club, its stone head equally effective as weapon or tool, he began digging methodically where Miriam had been focused. After long minutes of effort, his tool struck something yielding. Clearing away more snow revealed a woman's hand, delicate, feminine, and unmistakably still. With respectful movements, he uncovered enough to confirm what experience had already told him: the woman was beyond help, her face peaceful in death. With gentle care, Cheyenne covered her face again. Some sights were too harsh for a child to bear. "Did you find her?" Miriam's voice carried the desperate hope only the innocent can maintain against certainty. Cheyenne knelt before her, meeting her gaze directly. "I found her, little one. She is there beneath the snow." Understanding dawned in Miriam's eyes, followed immediately by fierce denial. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, she can't be. She was just talking to me. She told me to run faster." Before Cheyenne could react, Miriam bolted from the buffalo robe and scrambled to the hole he'd dug. She plunged her bare hands into the snow, digging frantically. "Mother, mother, wake up!" Her voice rose to a shriek that pierced the wind's howl. "Please wake up." Cheyenne caught her gently but firmly, knowing her actions would only hasten her own death from cold and exhaustion. "Miriam, stop. Your mother gave her life to save yours. Do not waste her sacrifice." The harsh truth shattered something within the child. Her struggles ceased, replaced by deep, soul-wrenching sobs that seemed too vast for her small frame. She collapsed against Cheyenne's chest, grief temporarily overwhelming even the cold's bite. A sharp crack split the air, unmistakable to Cheyenne's experienced ears. A rifle shot, distant but distinct despite the howling wind. Miriam's body stiffened, her sobs silenced instantly. "They found us," she whispered, new terror replacing grief. "Who found us?" Cheyenne asked sharply, body tensing as he scanned the whiteness surrounding them. "The bad men." Miriam's voice dropped to a frightened whisper. "The man with the red scarf and the others. They killed someone. We saw them. Father said we had to run." Her words tumbled out with renewed urgency, fingers tightening around her locket. "Mother always said, if we're in danger, run and find someone to help." But the snow came down the mountain, and another shot rang out closer this time. Thunder Bear appeared suddenly through the curtain of snow. 3 men approached from the east. He reported in Cheyenne, his normally stoic expression tense. Armed. Moving with purpose. One tracks like he was trained by Pawnee, follows signs most white men would miss. The situation clarified instantly in Cheyenne's mind. Miriam and her family had witnessed a murder at the hands of men who would eliminate any witnesses. They had pursued the family into the mountains during the blizzard, indirectly causing the avalanche that took her mother's life. And now they were closing in to finish what they'd started. Cheyenne made his decision instantly. He wrapped Miriam securely in the buffalo robe and lifted her onto his shoulder. "We must move now," he told her urgently, "or they will find us and kill us both." Terror flashed across her face, but she nodded with surprising composure. As Cheyenne turned to leave, Miriam suddenly twisted in his grasp. "Wait," she pleaded. "Mother's locket, I dropped it when I was digging." Cheyenne hesitated only a moment before spotting the wooden object, half buried in disturbed snow. As he retrieved it, he noticed again the morning star symbol carved into its edge, identical to a design his younger brother Keem had often used in his carvings. A strange coincidence, but there was no time to ponder it now. Behind them, 3 dark silhouettes emerged from the swirling white rifles raised as they swept the area for survivors. The snow reached mid-thigh in places, forcing Cheyenne to lift his knees high with each step. Despite the buffalo robe, Miriam shivered against his back, her breath forming small clouds that dissipated instantly in the frigid air. My horse waits beyond those pines, Chayton said, nodding toward a stand of wind-bent trees 50 yards ahead. Once we reach him, we can outrun them. A shout carried over the wind. One of the pursuers had spotted movement on a ridge where Thunder Bear had deliberately exposed himself to draw attention. There on the hill. The voice cut through the storm with malicious clarity. A rifle cracked, then another. Snow exploded from the ridge where Thunder Bear had been visible moments before. Chayton used the distraction to increase his pace, plowing through deep snow with Miriam clutched tightly to his chest. They reached the edge of the pines just as another volley of shots rang out, this time from the west, running elk drawing fire in another direction. Chayton's paint stallion stood stamping nervously among the tree's reins, tied to a low branch. Chayton had just untied the horse when a bullet splintered bark 3 feet to their right. He spun, pushing Miriam behind the broad trunk of a pine. Through the swirling snow, he glimpsed a figure advancing, a large man in a beaver fur coat with a distinctive red scarf knotted around his throat. "Stay down," Chayton ordered Miriam, drawing his war club. The range was too great for the weapon, but he needed to buy time. The trapper fired again. "I know you're there, Injun," he called, his voice carrying casual cruelty. "Hand over the girl. She's seen things she shouldn't." Chayton remained silent, calculating options. The horse was 10 feet away. If he could create enough confusion. A sharp whistle cut through the air, running elk's signal. Without hesitation, Chayton packed a tight snowball and hurled it toward snow-laden branches 30 feet to their left. The impact dislodged a mini avalanche that crashed down with a loud whoosh. As expected, the trapper swung his rifle toward the disturbance, firing reflexively. In that instant, Chayton scooped up Miriam and lunged for his horse. With one powerful movement, he tossed her onto the animal's back, then vaulted up behind her. Running elk charged from hiding, firing an old army revolver that forced the trapper to dive for cover. Chayton dug his heels into the paint's flanks, and the horse surged forward, breaking through the tree line into the open ground beyond. "They're following," Miriam warned, looking back. 3 trappers had reached the trees, one already mounting to give chase, the one with the red scarf. Miriam's voice shook. "His name is Jackson. I heard the man he killed call him that." Jackson. A name to put to their pursuer. Chayton steered toward a narrow ravine, half hidden by drifting snow, a shortcut known only to the Cheyenne, who had hunted these lands for generations. Behind them, another exchange of gunfire erupted as Thunder Bear and running elk harassed the trappers, buying precious time. But Chayton knew the delay would be temporary. From what Thunder Bear had reported, their primary pursuer was no ordinary trapper, but a skilled tracker. The chase had only begun. Night descended with brutal swiftness, the temperature plummeting to levels that threatened bare skin with frostbite in minutes. Chayton had pushed his horse as far as he dared, but the animal was tiring, its coat lathered with sweat despite the cold. "We continue on foot," he told Miriam, sliding from the saddle. He helped her down, concerned by how her movements had grown sluggish, a dangerous sign of advancing hypothermia. "Can't we stay with the horse?" she asked, her voice faint. "He's warm. He leaves tracks too easy to follow," Chayton explained, loosening the saddle cinch. "We move quieter without him." From his saddlebag, Chayton produced a leather strap that he fashioned into a harness to secure Miriam to his back, allowing his hands to remain free. He also retrieved a pair of rabbit fur-lined moccasins. "Your boots are soaked through. Put these on." As she changed footwear, Chayton studied her face in the fading light. Something in her features, the high cheekbones, the particular set of her eyes, struck him as oddly familiar, though he couldn't place why. More striking was a mannerism he noticed, the way she absently twisted a strand of hair around her finger while concentrating precisely as his brother Keme had done. Distant voices carried on the wind. Their pursuers had found their trail. Time was running short. "They're coming," Miriam whispered, fear sharpening her dulled senses. Chayton nodded grimly. "They are good trackers." His eyes narrowed with determination. But I am better. Once Miriam was secure on his back, Cheyenne moved into the darkness. He applied every woodland skill he possessed, walking on exposed rocks, doubling back, wading through icy streams to wash away their scent and footprints. The forest grew denser, ancient pines creating a canopy that reduced the snowfall beneath. Here the ground was covered with pine needles and patchy snow rather than deep drifts. A wolf's howl pierced the night, quickly answered by others. The storm had driven the pack down from the high country, adding another danger to their already desperate situation. Are those wolves? Miriam asked, her breath warm against his ear. Yes, but they fear men more than they hunger tonight. Mother used to say animals know more than we think. Miriam murmured the comment, striking Cheyenne as unusually perceptive for a child. She learned that from her special friend long ago. Your mother sounds wise. Cheyenne replied, curiosity piqued despite their dire circumstances. Who was this special friend? I don't know his name. She just said he was a Cheyenne warrior who taught her about the land and animals. She kept his picture in my locket. Cheyenne nearly missed a step, startled by the implication. Before he could pursue this revelation, Miriam's grip around his neck slackened alarmingly, her head drooping against his shoulder as exhaustion and cold took their toll. Miriam, he said sharply, jostling her, you must stay awake. She stirred with effort. Sorry. Mother always said I drift off just like my real father did. Lost in dreams, she called it. This second unexpected reference to Miriam's parentage raised questions that would have to wait. For now, keeping her conscious was the priority. Tell me about your mother, he encouraged. What was she like? Brave. Miriam answered, her voice strengthening slightly. After father, Joseph, who raised me, died last winter, she said we had to be strong together. We were going to her sister in Fort Laramie. And the men who chase us, why do they want to harm you? Miriam's body tensed. We were coming through the mountain pass when we heard men arguing. Mother said to stay hidden, but we could see through the trees. The man with the red scarf, Jackson, was fighting with an older man wearing a silver star badge. The older man called Jackson by name and said he knew about stolen gold. Her voice dropped lower, as if the memory itself were dangerous. Then Jackson pulled his gun and shot him right in the chest. There was so much blood on the snow. His men laughed and took something from the dead man's coat. Mother gasped and they heard us. A faint glow appeared ahead, moonlight reflecting off water. They were approaching a river that divided the territory, a natural boundary that would provide both obstacle and opportunity. If they could cross it, they might reach the Cheyenne winter encampment by dawn. Thunder Bear materialized from the shadows, his normally stoic face etched with urgency. The white hunters have split up, he reported in Cheyenne. Running Elk leads one northwest with false tracks. 2 continue on your trail, including the one with the red cloth at his neck. He is no common trapper, he was Army Scout before trained by Pawnee. Cheyenne frowned at this detail. And the crossing, ice forms at the edges, but the center runs swift. Dangerous, but passable. Thunder Bear's gaze fell on Miriam, noting her semi-conscious state. The child weakens rapidly. I will find a way, Cheyenne replied with more confidence than he felt. Return to Running Elk. Draw the hunters away, then circle back to the winter camp. Tell Greyfeather what has happened. Thunder Bear clasped Cheyenne's shoulder. The spirits of our ancestors guide your path, brother. Then he disappeared into the darkness. They continued toward the sound of rushing water. As they neared the riverbank, Cheyenne crouched behind a fallen log to survey the open ground. No movement caught his eye, but instinct told him danger lurked nearby. Wait here while I check if it's safe, he told Miriam, loosening the leather harness. He set her down behind the log, ensuring the buffalo robe covered her completely. Her eyelids drooped alarmingly, the combined effects of cold and exhaustion pulling her toward a sleep that could become permanent. Moving stealthily to the riverbank, Cheyenne examined the crossing. Ice extended from both banks, with 30 feet of dark water between. A difficult crossing, especially with Miriam's weakened condition. A twig snapped somewhere downstream. Cheyenne slid into the shadows of a large pine, every sense alert. Seconds later, a figure emerged from the tree line, a man in a heavy coat rifle in hand. The red scarf around his neck identified him as Jackson. The trapper moved with unusual stealth for a white man scanning the river with practiced efficiency. Cheyenne remained perfectly still until the man passed and then returned swiftly to Miriam's hiding place. Alarm surged through him when he found her curled into a tight ball, shivering violently, eyes closed. "Miriam," he urged, shaking her. "Miriam, wake up." Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't fully open. The cold was claiming her faster than anticipated. Her lips had taken on a bluish tinge, her breathing shallow and irregular. The river crossing would have to wait. She needed warmth immediately. Cheyenne gathered her into his arms and moved parallel to the river, heading upstream, where he knew of a rock overhang that might provide shelter. After 15 minutes of careful movement, they reached the outcropping, a shelf of granite that jutted from the riverbank, creating a small cave-like space beneath. Working quickly but silently, Cheyenne gathered dry twigs and pine needles near the entrance, along with resinous pine cones that would burn hot and fast. Within minutes, he had a small flame flickering among the tinder, carefully shielded to prevent the light from being visible outside. As warmth slowly filled their shelter, Cheyenne turned his attention back to Miriam. She had stopped shivering, a dangerous sign. He unwrapped the buffalo robe and found her clothes still damp from snow. Without hesitation, he removed his own buckskin shirt, still relatively dry beneath his outer layers, and stripped away her wet garments, replacing them with his shirt before rewrapping her in the robe. "Come back, little one," he murmured, rubbing her arms and legs to stimulate circulation. "Your journey is not finished." Gradually, color returned to her cheeks. Her breathing deepened, and the shivering resumed, a positive sign that her body was fighting the cold rather than surrendering to it. When her eyes finally opened, they were clearer, more focused. "I'm cold," she whispered. "I know, but you are fighting back now." Cheyenne offered her a small piece of pemmican dried meat mixed with fat and berries. "Eat this. It will help give you strength." As Miriam slowly chewed, Cheyenne kept the fire small, but hot, constantly aware of the risk it represented. The smoke, minimal though it was, could betray their position. Yet without heat, Miriam would certainly die. Outside their shelter, the wind moaned through the trees, carrying with it the distant howl of wolves. Somewhere in the darkness, men with murder in their hearts continued searching, guided by hatred and fear of what this child had witnessed. Cheyenne settled beside her war club, across his lap, eyes fixed on the narrow entrance. They would rest, restore their strength, then attempt the crossing before dawn. As Miriam drifted into an exhausted sleep, Cheyenne found his gaze drawn to the wooden locket now lying beside her. With gentle fingers, he picked it up, examining the morning star symbol carved into its edge. The craftsmanship was unmistakable. He had watched his brother Keme carve this exact pattern countless times. Combined with Miriam's casual references to her real father and her mother's special Cheyenne friend, a possibility began forming in Cheyenne's mind, one too significant to dismiss, yet too improbable to fully accept without proof. He carefully placed the locket back beside Miriam. Questions would have to wait. For now, survival demanded his full attention. An hour before dawn, Cheyenne woke Miriam. The fire had burned down to embers, providing just enough warmth to keep the worst of the cold at bay. Outside, the storm had finally passed, leaving a crystal-clear sky filled with stars. "We must cross the river before daylight comes," he whispered, noting with satisfaction that her color had improved. "Are the bad men still looking for us?" she asked as she pulled on her dried boots. "Yes, But they don't know where we are. We have a chance if we move quietly. He secured Miriam to his back once more. The river crossing will be dangerous, he explained. The water is very cold. If I go under, pull my hair hard to remind me you are there. Fear flashed across her face, but she nodded resolutely. I understand. They emerged into the pre-dawn stillness, a world transformed by moonlight on fresh snow. They had covered perhaps half the distance to the river, when a figure staggered from the trees ahead, Running Elk clutching his midsection, where dark blood soaked his buckskin shirt. They got too close, running. Elk gasped as Cheyenne rushed to his side. Wanted to hear their plans. He coughed blood speckling his lips. Jackson is no common trapper, former Army scout. He knows these lands well. Running Elk gripped Cheyenne's wrist with surprising strength. He is hurting you, brother. The river they know you will cross there. They wait on the other side to kill you both at sunrise. Cold dread settled in Cheyenne's stomach. The river had been their best hope of escape, now revealed as a deadly trap. How many? He asked, pressing his hand against Running Elk's wound to slow the bleeding. Though he recognized the futility of the gesture. 3 still. Thunder Bear rides for the camp, but help will come too late. Running Elk's eyes grew distant, his breathing labored. You must find another way. Through Devil's Canyon, perhaps. Miriam edged closer, her face pale with shock. Is he going to die? She whispered. Yes, Cheyenne answered honestly. He gives his life to bring us this warning. Running Elk's gaze shifted to Miriam, studying her features with unexpected intensity. The child, he murmured in Cheyenne. Her eyes, like Kimi's when he laughed. His focus returned to Cheyenne. Devil's Canyon, narrow passage, but leads to winter camp. They will not expect such a dangerous route. Devil's Canyon was aptly named a knife-thin cut through sheer rock walls barely passable in places. In summer, merely dangerous. In winter, with ice making the footing treacherous and unstable snow on the slopes above it approached suicidal. But it might be their only chance. Rest, brother, Cheyenne said softly. Your warning may save us. Running Elk's eyes cleared briefly. Protect the child. He whispered, then with startling clarity added, she belongs with our people. With those cryptic words, his eyes drifted closed, his breathing growing more shallow. Cheyenne gently pulled Miriam away. We must go. His spirit begins its journey now. As they moved away from the dying warrior, Cheyenne's mind whirled with implications. First, Keme's distinctive carving on the locket, then Miriam's casual references to her real father, and now Running Elk's perception of Keme's eyes in the child's face. Coincidence seemed increasingly unlikely, but confirming such suspicions would have to wait. Dawn approached, and with it, increased danger. They needed to reach Devil's Canyon before full light exposed them to their pursuers. By mid-morning, the sun hung in a cloudless sky, turning the snow-covered landscape blindingly bright. Cheyenne maintained a punishing pace, pushing toward the dark slash in the earth that marked the entrance to Devil's Canyon. They paused briefly in the shadow of a rocky outcropping. Cheyenne gently lowered Miriam, concerned by the renewed pallor of her face and the dark circles beneath her eyes. Despite her brave silence, her strength was clearly fading. He offered her his water skin and the last of his pemmican. As she ate slowly, Cheyenne studied the terrain ahead. Devil's Canyon looked foreboding, even from a distance, a wound in the landscape that promised danger to any who entered. More concerning were the fresh tracks he had spotted a mile back, 3 men on horseback moving parallel to their own path, but gradually converging. Jackson had somehow anticipated their change of direction. They're still following us, aren't they? Miriam asked, her perception sharper than he'd expected. Yes, they are determined hunters. Cheyenne tried to sound confident. But we are close to the canyon now. Once inside, their horses will be useless. Miriam studied the dark opening ahead. It looks scary. It is dangerous, Chayton admitted. But sometimes the safest path is through the greatest danger. She considered this wisdom, then nodded with surprising maturity. Like when Mother told me to hide in the root cellar when strange men came to our farm. It was dark and scary with the spiders, but safer than being found. They continued toward the canyon, making good progress, until Miriam suddenly stumbled, her knees buckling. Chayton caught her before she hit the ground, alarmed by the heat radiating from her skin. "I feel strange," she mumbled, "like when I had the fever last spring." Chayton pressed his palm to her forehead, confirming what he feared: she was burning with fever. The cold, the shock, the exhaustion had overwhelmed her body's defenses. He lifted her into his arms, abandoning stealth for speed. The canyon was still a mile away, its entrance beckoning like a dark promise. Inside, he knew of places where they might find shelter, small caves, and overhangs where he could build a fire and prepare medicine. A flash of movement on a ridge to their left caught his eye, a rider silhouetted against the sky. One of Jackson's men had spotted them. The man raised his arm, signaling to others out of sight. With grim determination, Chayton broke into a run. The canyon entrance was half a mile away now, a distance he could cover quickly if unencumbered. But carrying Miriam slowed him considerably, and the deep snow further impeded his progress. A rifle shot cracked across the landscape, the bullet striking snow 10 feet to his right. A warning or poor aim. He angled toward a cluster of boulders, using them as temporary cover. 2 riders were visible now, converging from different angles. Of Jackson himself, there was no sign, a fact that worried Chayton more than the visible threats. Miriam stirred in his arms, roused by the gunfire. "Are they going to kill us?" she asked, her voice faint but lucid. "No," Chayton answered firmly. "They will not." He studied the terrain between their position and the canyon entrance, 100 yards of relatively open ground with minimal cover. A desperate sprint, but their only option. "Hold on to me," he instructed Miriam, shifting her to his back. "Do not let go no matter what happens." She wrapped her arms around his neck weakly. "I won't let go." With a sudden burst of speed, Chayton broke from cover, running in a zigzag pattern toward the canyon entrance. Behind him, shouts of alarm rose from the trappers, followed immediately by gunfire. Bullets whined past, kicking up snow and dirt. 50 yards to go. Chayton's lungs burned with the effort, his muscles protesting the sustained sprint through deep snow while carrying Miriam's weight. A bullet struck a rock just ahead, sending stone fragments flying. One sliced across Chayton's cheek, drawing blood, but he barely noticed the sting. 10 yards. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, a horse pushed to its limit by a desperate rider. With a final surge of effort, Chayton lunged forward, crossing the threshold where open plain gave way to the canyon's embrace. The walls rose immediately on either side, narrowing quickly from the entrance. He pushed deeper into the canyon, where the path began to twist between towering rock faces. Only when they had rounded the first major bend, putting solid rock between themselves and their pursuers, did Chayton slow to a walk. His breath came in great gasps, his legs trembling with exertion. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit changed. The trappers were arguing, their voices echoing off canyon walls. Entering Devil's Canyon clearly gave even hardened outlaws pause. Chayton continued moving, putting distance between them and the entrance. The canyon narrowed further in some places, barely wide enough for a man to walk upright. The floor was treacherous, ice-covered stones that shifted underfoot, patches of snow concealing crevices. After 15 minutes of careful progress, they reached a small side chamber, a natural alcove where the canyon wall had been hollowed out by erosion. It offered shelter and crucially could not be seen from the main path. Here, Chayton gently set Miriam down. Her condition had worsened during their flight, her breathing rapid and shallow, her skin burning to the touch. "Miriam," he said, patting her cheek lightly, "can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, revealing fever-bright eyes that struggled to focus. "Hot," she mumbled. "Where are we?" "Somewhere safe for now." I need to gather things to make medicine for your fever. Will you be brave and wait here?" She managed a weak nod before her eyes drifted closed again. Cheyenne moved quickly, gathering what he needed from the canyon. Despite winter, certain plants still grew in the sheltered microclimate moss that retained water-hardy herbs in crevices where sunlight reached. Most valuable was a patch of willow trees growing near a small spring that bubbled from the canyon wall. Willow bark, properly prepared, would help reduce Miriam's fever. As he worked, Cheyenne remained acutely aware of danger. Occasional sounds echoing through the canyon confirmed that the trappers had decided to follow on foot. Returning to the alcove, Cheyenne found Miriam where he had left her, curled in fitful fever-induced sleep. He immediately created a small fire pit using stones to contain a tiny flame. The fire was a calculated risk. Smoke might betray their position, but without medicine, Miriam's condition would worsen beyond recovery. While water from the spring heated, Cheyenne stripped and crushed willow bark into a rough powder that he added to the water. The resulting bitter tea would help reduce fever if he could get her to drink it. "Miriam," he called softly, lifting her upper body. "You must drink this. It will help the fever." Her eyes opened partway, confusion evident in their depths. "Mother," she whispered. "No, little one. It is Cheyenne. Your mother is not here, but she would want you to drink this medicine." The mention of her mother seemed to penetrate the fever's fog. Miriam swallowed the bitter tea obediently, then drifted back to restless sleep. The day waned, shadows lengthening as the sun dipped toward the western horizon. Soon darkness would cloak them, providing additional concealment, but also making navigation through the treacherous passage nearly impossible. Cheyenne built up the fire, slightly arranging rocks to reflect heat toward Miriam, while minimizing visible light. Then he settled near the alcove entrance, war club across his lap, every sense alert for signs of approach. As darkness fell, the canyon transformed. Wind whistled through narrow passages, creating eerie sounds like distant voices. Occasional rock falls echoed through the maze of stone, making it difficult to distinguish natural sounds from those that might signal human approach. Miriam slept fitfully sometimes, mumbling words Cheyenne couldn't make out, other times calling for her mother. He checked her temperature periodically, re-wetting the moss compress on her forehead. The willow bark tea seemed to be having some effect. Her skin felt marginally less hot to the touch. During one of her more lucid moments, she opened her eyes and studied him with surprising clarity. "The bad men won't stop looking for us, will they?" she asked. "No," Cheyenne admitted. "They have too much to lose if you tell what you saw." She nodded as if his confirmation matched her own understanding. "My father, Joseph, always said truth was important, that hiding bad things only makes them stronger." She fingered the wooden locket around her neck. "Mother kept this closed most of the time, said it was private. But she would open it sometimes late at night and look at the picture inside for a long time." Cheyenne hesitated, then asked the question that had been forming since he first saw the morning star symbol. "This special friend of your mother's, did she ever speak his name?" Miriam's brow furrowed in concentration. "I think so. Something short. Something. Kia. Kem." The Keme, Cheyenne suggested, his heart suddenly racing. Her face brightened with recognition. "Yes, that's it. How did you know?" Before Cheyenne could respond, a soft sound from outside the alcove froze them both. The scrape of a boot on stone, barely audible but unmistakable to Cheyenne's trained ear. They were no longer alone. He extinguished the fire with a swift movement, plunging the alcove into darkness. Pressing a finger to his lips to signal silence, he moved to the entrance, every sense straining into the blackness beyond. For long minutes, nothing moved. Then directly across from their hiding place, a shadow separated from the deeper darkness of the canyon wall, a man moving with the careful stealth of an experienced hunter. Even in the dim starlight filtering into the canyon, the red scarf at his throat identified him unmistakably. Jackson had found them. Cheyenne remained perfectly still, barely breathing as he watched Jackson pause at a fork in the canyon path. The outlaw studied the ground, intently searching for tracks in the faint moonlight that penetrated the canyon depths. Behind Cheyenne, Miriam huddled against the alcove's back wall, understanding the need for absolute silence, despite her fever. The willow bark tea had reduced her temperature enough to restore some clarity, though she remained dangerously weak. Jackson knelt, running his fingers over a patch of disturbed earth where Cheyenne had crossed hours earlier. His head tilted as if listening to the canyon itself for clues. Then, with deliberate movements, he withdrew a flask from his coat, uncorked it, and took a long swallow. "I know you're close, Injun," he called, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Why not make this easy? The girl's the only witness to a killing that never happened. No jury would take a child's word over respectable businessmen anyway." Cheyenne remained motionless, weighing options. Their hiding place remained undetected for now, but Jackson was methodically eliminating possibilities. Eventually, he would find them. The outlaw continued moving along the main passage, pausing occasionally to examine the ground or walls. His thorough search pattern confirmed what Running Elk had reported. This was no common trapper, but a man trained in tracking. When Jackson had moved 30 yards past their alcove, Cheyenne slipped back to Miriam's side. "Oh, we must move," he whispered, barely audible. "There is another way out of this alcove, a narrow crack in the back wall that connects to a different passage." "Can you walk?" Miriam nodded, though doubt shadowed her eyes. Good. We will leave now while he searches ahead." Cheyenne gathered their few belongings and then guided Miriam toward the rear of the alcove, where a fissure in the rock, nearly invisible in daylight and completely hidden in darkness, offered escape. "It will be tight," he warned. "I'll go first, then help you through." The crack was barely wide enough for Cheyenne's shoulders. He turned sideways, inching through the narrow opening, testing each movement to ensure no sound betrayed them. Once through, he reached back for Miriam. Her small size allowed her to pass more easily, though her weakness made every movement an effort. When she emerged on the other side, they found themselves in a secondary passage that ran parallel to the main canyon, narrower, darker, but offering a potential escape route. They moved slowly along this new path, Cheyenne supporting much of Miriam's weight. The footing was treacherous, loose shale that shifted underfoot, threatening to send small avalanches of stone cascading down with every step. After 20 minutes of painstaking progress, a faint glow appeared ahead, moonlight reflecting off ice, where the passage opened onto a ledge overlooking the main canyon. Cheyenne cautiously approached the opening, surveying the scene below. What he saw sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the frigid night air. Jackson stood directly beneath their position, conferring with his two companions, who had apparently followed him into the canyon. Worse one held a torch that illuminated the area, revealing tracks that Cheyenne and Miriam had left earlier. "The tracks lead to that alcove," one of the men was saying, pointing to their former hiding place. "But they ain't in there now. Must have moved on deeper into the canyon." Jackson shook his head. "No. They're still close." He surveyed the canyon walls methodically, his gaze passing just below where Cheyenne and Miriam now crouched. "Check for any other exits from that alcove. There might be connecting passages." The third man, a hulking figure with a scarred face, spat into the darkness. "This place gives me the creeps, Jackson. The Injuns call it Devil's Canyon for good reason. We should wait them out at the other end and risk them finding another way out." Jackson's voice carried the edge of command. "No. We finish this now. That girl saw too much." He adjusted the red scarf at his neck, a nervous gesture that suggested personal stakes beyond simple witness elimination. "The law won't stop looking for Turnbull." The scarred man persisted. "Killing the girl won't change that." "The law can't prove anything without witnesses," Jackson snapped. "And Marshal Turnbull made it personal when he dragged up my past. 15 years I've built my new life, and he was ready to destroy everything over some ancient business." His hand moved unconsciously to his side, where Chayton glimpsed the butt of a revolver. Now move. Find them. The exchange revealed Much Jackson was no random killer, but a man with a past he'd been running from. Marshal Turnbull had recognized him, threatening to expose him. The murder Miriam had witnessed was not just about gold, but about a fugitive desperate to maintain his new identity. As the men separated to continue their search, Chayton pulled back from the ledge. Their position was precarious. The secondary passage continued deeper into the canyon. But Miriam's strength was failing rapidly. Her fever had returned with greater intensity, her small body trembling with chills despite the sweat beading on her forehead. They needed a new strategy. Chayton studied their surroundings with the careful assessment of a lifetime spent in wilderness survival. The ledge they occupied connected to a series of similar outcroppings that climbed the canyon wall like a natural staircase. Above, perhaps 50 feet up, a larger shelf jutted from the rock face, a defensive position where they would have clear sight of anyone approaching from below. "Miriam," he whispered, "we must climb higher. Can you hold onto my back?" She nodded weakly, summoning what remained of her strength. Chayton secured her with the leather harness, then began the precarious ascent. Each handhold required careful testing. Loose rock would not only risk a fall, but alert the hunters below to their position. The climb took nearly 30 minutes, with Chayton pausing frequently to rest and listen for pursuit. When they finally reached the upper shelf, he found it deeper than expected, almost a small cave, extending 15 feet into the canyon wall. Most importantly, the position offered clear lines of sight down the paths below, while providing cover from anyone looking up. If they remained quiet, they might evade detection until dawn. Chayton gently settled Miriam at the rear of the shelf, wrapping her in the buffalo robe. Her condition worried him greatly. The fever had risen again, her breathing shallow and rapid. Without fire to warm her and prepare more medicine, she would continue weakening. "Oh," she murmured, her eyes glassy with fever. "So cold." "I know," he soothed, chafing her hands between his. "You must be strong a little longer." From below came the occasional shout as the trappers called to each other, coordinating their search. Their voices echoed confusingly off the canyon walls, making it difficult to pinpoint exact positions. But they were methodically working their way along both the main passage and connecting side routes. It was only a matter of time before someone thought to look up. As if reading his thoughts, Miriam whispered, "What happens when they find us?" Chayton met her gaze directly. "Then we fight. But first, we use the canyon against them." An idea had been forming in his mind, dangerous, but offering better odds than waiting to be discovered. Devil's Canyon earned its name, not just from its forbidding appearance, but from the treacherous conditions it created. Flash floods, rock slides, and avalanches had claimed many lives over generations, and snow still clung precariously to the canyon rim above. "Rest now," he told Miriam. "I must prepare." Moving carefully along the shelf, Chayton gathered loose stones, creating small piles at strategic points along the edge. Then he unwound his leather belt, fashioning a crude sling that could launch the stones with force and accuracy. His plan was simple, but required precise timing. When the trappers moved into the narrow section directly below a barrage of stones against the upper canyon wall, might trigger a small avalanche enough to disrupt or separate the pursuers without bringing down the entire canyon wall. Risky, but their options were dwindling, with Miriam's condition deteriorating and dawn still hours away. Returning to check on her, Chayton found Miriam shivering violently despite the buffalo robe. She clutched her wooden locket with white-knuckled intensity, as if it anchored her to consciousness. "Would you like to see inside?" she asked suddenly, her voice stronger than he expected. "Mother's locket. It might be important." Before Chayton could respond, voices directly below froze them both. "Tracks end here," came Jackson's voice, alarmingly close. They didn't continue along the passage. "So where'd they go?" demanded the scarred man. A long silence followed, during which Chayton could almost feel Jackson's mind working. Then, up. Check the walls. Look for hand and footholds. Time had run out. Chayton moved swiftly to the edge, gathering his first stones. Below, a torch illuminated 3 figures examining the canyon wall. Jackson and his companions standing in perfect position for his plan. Taking careful aim with his makeshift sling, Chayton launched the first stone. It struck high on the opposite wall, dislodging a shower of smaller rocks and ice that clattered down harmlessly away from the men. They spun toward the sound, momentarily distracted. In that instant, Chayton sent 2 more stones in rapid succession, these striking precisely where a snow cornice overhung the canyon. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like distant thunder, the snow began to slide. "Avalanche!" shouted the scarred man as the 3 scattered in different directions. Jackson and one companion dove toward the main passage, while the third man bolted down a side route. The snow cascade wasn't massive, but it effectively divided the canyon floor, creating a barrier between the groups. "Now," Chayton told Miriam, lifting her onto his back once more. "While they are separated." They descended rapidly along a different route than they had climbed, reaching the canyon floor at a point behind where the scarred man had fled. From there, they could access a narrow side passage that Running Elk had once shown Chayton, a treacherous route seldom used even by the Cheyenne, but one that eventually connected to the western exit of the canyon. They had covered perhaps 50 yards when a shout behind them confirmed they'd been spotted. "There they are." The scarred man appeared at the junction they had just left, raising his rifle. Chayton pushed Miriam behind an outcropping as the rifle cracked the bullet, striking stone inches from his head. Without hesitation, he charged the man closing distance before he could reload. The scarred trapper dropped his rifle and drew a large hunting knife, slashing wildly. Chayton evaded the first swing, but the second caught his arm, opening a gash through his buckskin sleeve. Pain flashed through him, but Chayton pressed the attack, driving his shoulder into the man's midsection. They both crashed to the ground, grappling in the confined space. The trapper was powerfully built, his strength nearly matching Chayton's, despite the Cheyenne's superior training. The knife came up again, aiming for Chayton's throat. He caught the man's wrist, straining to keep the blade from finding its target. For long seconds, they remained locked in stalemate muscles, trembling with effort. A sharp crack suddenly echoed through the passage, not a gunshot, but the sound of stone striking bone. The scarred man's eyes rolled back, his grip on the knife slackening as he slumped forward unconsciously. Behind him stood Miriam, a rock clutched in her small hands, her face pale but determined despite the fever that ravaged her body. "He was going to kill you," she said simply. Chayton wasted no time on words. Retrieving the trapper's knife and rifle, he guided Miriam deeper into the side passage. The commotion would bring Jackson and the other pursuer. Quickly they needed to move. The passage narrowed until they were forced to turn sideways, inching through gaps barely wide enough for Chayton's shoulders. For Miriam, the tight spaces proved easier to navigate, though her weakened condition made every step an ordeal. Behind them, distant shouts confirmed the others had found their unconscious companion and were in pursuit once more. But the maze-like quality of Devil's Canyon worked in Chayton and Miriam's favor. Now the complex network of passages offered multiple routes, and Chayton's knowledge of the terrain gave them advantage. After 20 minutes of difficult progress, they emerged onto a wider path that Chayton recognized they were approaching the western section of the canyon, perhaps a mile from the exit. But Miriam had reached her limit. Her legs buckled, and she would have fallen if Chayton hadn't caught her. Her skin burned with fever, her breathing alarmingly shallow. "Can't go further," she gasped. Chayton lifted her into his arms, but he too was reaching the end of his endurance. Blood still seeped from the knife wound on his arm, and the sustained exertion of the past day and night had drained his strength. They needed shelter somewhere defensible where Miriam could rest and he could prepare more medicine. A place where he could make a stand if Jackson tracked them down. 50 yards ahead, the passage widened into a natural chamber where several routes converged. Cheyenne remembered this place from hunting expeditions years earlier, a chamber with multiple entrances, but crucially, a single approach that was easily visible from inside. The rear wall featured a natural stone shelf elevated 6 feet above the floor, where someone could maintain a defensive position. This would be where they made their stand. Carrying Miriam to the raised shelf, Cheyenne settled her carefully, ensuring the buffalo robe covered her completely. "Rest here," he instructed. "I must prepare." First, he gathered what meager materials he could find for medicine moss from damp corners of the chamber, herbs growing in crevices where sunlight occasionally penetrated. Most importantly, he found a small seep of water trickling down one wall, providing both drinking water and means to prepare willow bark tea for Miriam's fever. Next, he turned his attention to defense. The chamber had 5 entrances, but 4 were small crawl spaces too tight for a grown man to navigate quickly. The main approach, the path they had used to enter, was wide enough for 2 men to walk abreast. This would be where Jackson and his remaining companion would come. Cheyenne positioned the stolen rifle where he could grab it quickly, then used the hunting knife to sharpen a long branch into a makeshift spear. He gathered rocks of throwing size, placing them within easy reach on the shelf beside Miriam. Finally, he prepared traps at the chamber entrance, loose stones balanced carefully on projections above the path, which could be triggered by impact against support rocks below. Not deadly, perhaps, but sufficient to create confusion and advantage when the hunters arrived. With preparations complete, Cheyenne returned to Miriam's side. She had drifted into fevered sleep, her breathing quick and shallow. He gently roused her, helping her drink water and more willow bark tea. "The bad men are still coming?" she asked, her voice faint but lucid. "Yes, but we are ready for them now." Miriam's hand moved to her wooden locket, fingers tracing the morning star symbol. "You should see inside," she said. "Before they come, it might be important." With trembling fingers, she unclasped the locket. Inside lay a small faded photograph, a woman Cheyenne recognized as Miriam's mother from the glimpse he had caught in the Snowdrift. But beside her stood a man whose features sent a jolt of recognition through him, his brother Keme unmistakable despite the formal pose. "Mother said he was special to her," Miriam explained. "She would never tell me more, except that I had his eyes. She wrote something on the back, too." Turning the photograph over revealed neat feminine script Keme, and a date 8 years earlier, Miriam's birth year. Understanding crystallized with absolute clarity. Keme had disappeared for nearly a year before returning to the tribe, withdrawn and changed. He had spoken vaguely of a white woman he had met near Fort Laramie, a relationship ended by the realities of their separate worlds. Keme had died 3 winters ago in a skirmish with Crow raiders, never knowing he had fathered a child. "Keme was my brother," Cheyenne said softly, the words emerging almost involuntarily. Miriam's eyes widened. "Your brother," she repeated, looking at the photograph, then at Cheyenne's face with new understanding. "Then that means we are family by blood," Cheyenne confirmed. "You are my brother's daughter. My niece." Before Miriam could respond, the sound of dislodged stones echoed from the passage outside, someone approaching with attempted stealth, but unfamiliar with the treacherous footing. Cheyenne moved swiftly to his defensive position, signaling Miriam to remain absolutely still. Minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by the distant drip of water and Miriam's labored breathing. Then a shadow darkened the main entrance, followed by a figure moving with careful deliberation, Jackson, the red scarf still knotted at his throat. He paused at the threshold, scanning the chamber with experienced eyes. "I know you're in here," he called, making no attempt to conceal his presence now. "This passage is the only one that leads to the western exit. The girl can't have gone far in her condition." Cheyenne remained motionless, waiting. Jackson took another step forward, triggering the first trap. Stones clattered down around him, one striking his shoulder. He dove sideways, remarkably quick for his size, drawing his revolver as he rolled to cover. That was clever. Jackson acknowledged his voice, echoing off the chamber walls. But it changes nothing. Ellis is watching the other approach. There's no way out except through us. He shifted position, trying to locate Cheyenne in the shadows. You're good, I'll give you that. Following your trail was like tracking a ghost. But this ends now. The girl dies today, and so do you. Why? Cheyenne called deliberately, projecting his voice to make his position unclear. She is just a child. A child who saw what no one was supposed to see. Jackson replied. Do you know what U.S. Marshals do to men with my past 15 years? I've built a new life. 15 years of playing by their rules, building respect and position. Then Turnbull recognized me from the old days. Bitterness colored his words. Said I couldn't outrun my past, that he was taking me in for crimes I paid for years ago. So you killed him. I did what I had to. Jackson's control slipped, revealing the desperation beneath his calculated exterior. Everything I built was about to disappear because some self-righteous lawman couldn't let the past stay buried. Cheyenne recognized the opening. Jackson's emotional response revealed his position more precisely than sight could in the shadowed chamber. Carefully, silently, he raised the rifle, taking aim at the outcropping where Jackson had taken cover. But before he could fire, another figure appeared at a different entrance. The second trapper, Ellis, emerging from one of the crawl spaces Cheyenne had thought too narrow for a man. The unexpected development split Cheyenne's attention fatally. Jackson, seizing the advantage, fired twice in rapid succession. One bullet struck stone near Cheyenne's head, sending fragments slicing across his already wounded cheek. The second tore through the flesh of his thigh, drawing a hiss of pain he couldn't suppress. I got him, Jackson called triumphantly, emerging from cover. Ellis checked the back of the chamber. Find the girl. Cheyenne tried to bring the rifle to bear, but the leg wound made shifting position agonizingly difficult. Blood flowed freely down his thigh, hot and slick against his skin. His vision wavered momentarily as shock set in. Ellis advanced cautiously toward the rear of the chamber where Miriam lay concealed. Cheyenne abandoned the rifle, drawing the knife instead, a desperate last-ditch weapon. Jackson approached Cheyenne's position revolver, trained steadily on his chest. Nothing personal, he said with grim finality. Just survival. As his finger tightened on the trigger, a small figure emerged from the shadows behind him. Miriam moving with uncanny silence despite her fever. In her hands, she clutched a burning branch, one end glowing with embers from the small fire Cheyenne had prepared for her medicine. With surprising strength, she thrust the burning end against Jackson's coat where it hung loose at his back. The fabric, treated with animal fat for waterproofing, caught immediately. Jackson's scream of surprise and pain shattered the chamber's tense atmosphere. He dropped his revolver, frantically trying to reach the flames spreading across his back. Ellis, he shouted, spinning desperately. Help me. The distraction gave Cheyenne the opening he needed. Ignoring the fiery pain in his leg, he lunged forward, driving his knife deep into Jackson's side. The outlaw's scream transformed from surprise to agony as he collapsed to his knees. Ellis, momentarily frozen by the unexpected turn of events, recovered quickly. Raising his rifle, he took aim at Miriam, who stood exposed and defenseless. No. Cheyenne roared, throwing himself forward with the last of his strength. His body collided with Ellis, just as the rifle discharged the bullet, striking the chamber ceiling. They crashed to the ground together, Cheyenne's momentum carrying them both toward one of the chamber's smaller exits, a crevice that dropped 15 feet to a lower passage. Ellis fought desperately as they teetered at the edge, his hands finding Cheyenne's throat. Black spots danced in Cheyenne's vision as the man's thumbs pressed against his windpipe. With fading strength, Cheyenne drove his knee upward, striking Ellis in the groin. The man's grip loosened momentarily enough for Cheyenne to twist sideways, using their combined momentum to send them both over the edge. They struck the lower passage hard, Ellis taking the brunt of the impact. The crack of breaking bone echoed through the confined space as the trapper's leg twisted at an unnatural angle. He screamed, the sound reverberating off stone walls. Cheyenne rolled clear, every part of his body protesting the abuse it had endured. Blood soaked his leggings from the bullet wound, and his injured arm throbbed with renewed intensity. But Ellis was in worse condition. The fall had shattered his leg bone, protruding through flesh in a compound fracture that would prove fatal without immediate attention. Struggling to his feet, Cheyenne retrieved Ellis's dropped rifle before the man could reach for it. Finish it, then. Ellis spat, his face contorted with pain. Or are you the kind that leaves a man to slow suffering? Cheyenne considered the wounded trapper for a long moment. Then, with deliberate movements, he tore strips from Ellis's own shirt, fashioning a crude tourniquet and bindings for the broken leg. Why? Ellis gasped as Cheyenne worked. Because death comes for us all eventually, Cheyenne replied. But it is not my place to decide when. He tightened the last binding. This will keep you alive until your friends find you. What happens after is between you and your God. Leaving the stunned trapper, Cheyenne climbed painfully back to the upper chamber, using handholds in the rock face. The exertion nearly cost him consciousness, blood flowing freely from his reopened wounds. In the chamber, he found Miriam kneeling beside Jackson's motionless form. The outlaw lay face down, the knife still embedded in his side, blood pooling beneath him. His back was a mass of burned flesh and fabric, where Miriam's improvised weapon had struck. Is he? Miriam asked, her voice small with the realization of what she had done. Cheyenne checked for breath, finding none. He is gone, he confirmed gently. You saved my life. Her face, pale with fever and exhaustion, showed no triumph. Only the solemn understanding of one who had glimpsed the adult world's harsh realities too soon. I didn't want to kill him, she whispered. But he was going to kill you. I know. Cheyenne gathered her into his arms, feeling the heat of her fever against his chest. You did what was necessary, as your mother did for you at the avalanche. They remained thus for several minutes, two survivors bound by blood and shared ordeal. Then Cheyenne roused himself, knowing they couldn't linger. His own wounds needed attention, and Miriam's fever remained dangerously high. Can you walk? He asked, helping her to her feet. She nodded weakly, determination shining through exhaustion. Together, she said, her small hand finding his, supporting each other, the wounded warrior and the fevered child. They made their slow way toward the western exit of Devil's Canyon. Dawn had arrived during their ordeal, sunlight gradually penetrating the deeper recesses of the canyon as they approached its mouth. As they emerged into full daylight, squinting against the sudden brightness, movement on a distant ridge caught Cheyenne's attention. Riders, perhaps a dozen, approached from the north. For a moment his hand moved instinctively to the stolen rifle slung across his back. Then recognition dawned as he made out the distinctive headdress of the lead rider. Gray feather, he said, relief evident in his voice. And warriors from our camp, Thunder Bear, reached them. Within minutes, the Cheyenne riders surrounded them, faces grave, as they took in Cheyenne's bloodied appearance, and the white child at his side. Gray Feather, his face deeply lined from 8 decades of life on the plains, dismounted with dignity that belied his years. Thunder Bear spoke truly, the elder said in Cheyenne. You found a child of the white men and brought great trouble with you. Despite the words, there was no accusation in his tone. She witnessed a murder, Cheyenne explained. The killers pursued us. 2 are dead, 1 remains in the canyon wounded. Gray Feather nodded, then surprised Cheyenne by addressing Miriam directly in halting English. Child, you are safe now among the Tsitsistas, the Cheyenne. No harm will come to you here. Miriam looked up at the imposing figure with unexpected composure. Thank you, she said simply. Both of you need healing. Gray Feather continued gesturing to the fresh blood staining Chayton's leg. Come, the winter camp awaits. One of the warriors dismounted, offering his horse to Chayton, who lifted Miriam into the saddle before climbing up behind her. As they rode toward safety, Chayton found himself studying Miriam's face with new awareness, seeing Kami's features that had been there all along the high cheekbones, the particular set of her eyes when she smiled. His brother's child, his blood. A connection to family he had thought forever lost when a pony and their son perished in flames 7 years ago. There is something you should know, Chayton told Gray Feather, switching to Cheyenne. The child is Kami's daughter. I have seen proof beyond doubt. The elder's eyes widened slightly, the closest he came to showing surprise. He studied Miriam with new intensity, recognition dawning in his aged eyes. Yes, he said finally. I see him in her face now. The spirits have strange paths for returning the lost to us. As they approached the winter camp, Chayton found himself contemplating those words. 7 years he had wandered alone, nursing grief and bitterness, believing he had nothing left to live for. Now, through events that began with tragedy, he had found purpose again and family. Miriam slumped against him, exhaustion finally claiming her now that danger had passed. But her small hand still clutched the wooden locket containing the photographic proof of her heritage, a bridge between worlds that would shape all their futures. The circle broken 7 years ago had begun to close. 1 week later, Chayton stood on a hill overlooking the small settlement of Sweetwater Junction. The town nestled along a river crossing consisted of perhaps 30 buildings, including a newly whitewashed structure with a sign reading, Carter's Millinery and Fine Goods. Inside that building, Miriam was establishing a new life with her Aunt Abigail, who had traveled from Fort Laramie upon receiving news of her sister's death and her niece's survival. The meeting between Chayton and Abigail had been tense initially. A Cheyenne warrior and a proper white woman from St. Louis, both laying claim to Miriam's future. But Miriam herself had bridged that divide with wisdom beyond her years. I don't want to choose between my mother's family and my father's family, she had declared during their meeting with Sheriff Hollister and Fort Laramie's commander. I don't think I should have to. In the end, a compromise had been reached. Abigail would establish her millinery business in Sweetwater Junction rather than returning east, allowing Miriam to maintain connections with both sides of her heritage. She would live with her aunt, receiving formal education, but would also spend time with the Cheyenne during safe seasons, learning the ways of her father's people. Legal guardianship would rest with Abigail, but Chayton would be recognized as having a significant role in Miriam's upbringing, an uncle by blood, who had earned the right to help shape her future. Now, as spring's first tentative warmth began to soften winter's grip, Chayton prepared to rejoin his people for the annual buffalo hunt. He would be gone for many weeks, following the great herds across the plains as his ancestors had done for countless generations. Movement caught his eye, a small figure running up the path toward his position, dark hair flying in the breeze. Miriam, fully recovered from her ordeal, scrambled up the hillside with the boundless energy of youth. I knew I'd find you here, she declared triumphantly, slightly breathless from her climb. Aunt Abigail's busy with customers, but she said to tell you there's a package for you at the shop before you leave. Chayton smiled, touched by the thoughtfulness. In the short time they had known each other, Abigail Carter had shown remarkable openness to bridging cultural divides. I will visit her before I depart, he promised. But I wanted to see the valley from here first, to know that you are in a good place. Miriam nodded, understanding the unspoken concern. It's not as exciting as the camp, she admitted, but Aunt Abigail is teaching me lots of things, and I start school next week. Her expression grew serious. Will you really come back when the summer moon is full like you promised? I will, Chayton assured her. And next time, if your aunt agrees, perhaps you can visit the summer camp for a few days. Singing Bird has asked about you." Miriam's face brightened, but uncertainty quickly shadowed her eyes. "Will everyone accept me, even though I look more like mother than father?" Cheyenne knelt to meet her at eye level. "You are Kame's daughter," he said firmly. "But more importantly, you have shown courage and strength of spirit far beyond your years. The Cheyenne value these qualities, above all else." He reached into a pouch at his waist and withdrew a small object, a carved wooden horse polished smooth by years of handling. "This belonged to my son," he said quietly, placing it in her palm. "He carried it everywhere. I have kept it since his passing. But now I think he would want you to have it." Miriam stared at the carving, understanding the significance of the gift. "What was his name?" she asked softly. "Hototo. It means spirit warrior." Cheyenne hadn't spoken his son's name aloud in 7 years. Doing so now released something long trapped within his chest, not removing his grief, but transforming it into something that could coexist with new purpose. Miriam closed her fingers carefully around the wooden horse. "I'll take good care of it," she promised solemnly. "And I want to hear all about him when you return. And about my father, too. I will tell you all their stories," Cheyenne agreed, "so that they live on through you." As they walked down the hill together, Miriam's small hand trustingly in his, Cheyenne reflected on the strange path that had led him here. The avalanche that had claimed one life had ultimately saved many others, not just Miriam's physical survival, but his own spiritual rebirth. At the millinery shop, Abigail greeted them warmly, presenting Cheyenne with a carefully wrapped package, a new buckskin shirt she had made combining traditional Cheyenne designs with practical elements from her years of needlework. Their farewell was not sorrowful, but hopeful, a pause in a continuing journey, rather than an ending. As Cheyenne mounted his horse to depart, Miriam stood beside her aunt in the doorway of their new home. The wooden locket containing her father's photograph hanging around her neck, her cousin's carved horse clutched in her hand. "Remember?" Cheyenne called to her. "You carry the strength of 2 worlds within you. Honor both and you will never truly be alone." Until the summer moon, she called back, standing straight and proud, her mother's daughter, her father's child. Cheyenne raised his hand in farewell, then turned his horse toward the open plains where his people awaited. For the first time in 7 years, he rode forward not merely to survive another season, but to live a life with purpose beyond his own existence. To be the bridge between worlds for a child who belonged to both. The wind carried the scent of spring across the plains, promising renewal after the long winter. And in that promise, Cheyenne found peace.